Awesome. So we are live. Smile, you're on camera. Uh, so I guess I'll introduce myself first, if that is okay. My name is Yaracet Medina. I'm the Assistant Director for Grad Student Development and Postdoctoral Affairs at UMBC. I work in the Graduate School Department, and we are co-hosting this event with the library with Erin. Erin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Erin Durham, and I work as a reference and instruction librarian at the library. And welcome. This is the Research and Publication Workshop, thinking of humanities and social sciences faculty perspective. We also want to acknowledge the work that Jasmine Shoemaker did to prepare for this session, and she is one of my library colleagues and are very appreciative of all her work as well.
Absolutely.
And we are especially thrilled to introduce 3 panelists today, all faculty who teach within CAHSS and do research, so humanities and social sciences. So to start out with Dr. Bennett, would you like to introduce Yaracet?
Absolutely. Dr. Pamela Bennett is a professor in the School of Public Policy. She studies social inequity with respect to race, ethnicity, immigrant generation, and social class in education and residential space. She has a doctorate in sociology from the University of Michigan and Harvard. We have Dr. Felipe Filomeno, who is an associate professor in the political science and global studies at UMBC and is an interdisciplinary scholar and teacher who has used community-based historical, competitive, and quality research methods to study immigration, intergroup relations, Latin America, and Latinos in the United States.
And we have Dr. Tania Lizarazo, who is an associate professor in the Department of Modern Languages, Linguistics, and Intercultural Communication, and the Global Studies program at UMBC. Her interdisciplinary research and teaching focuses on challenging writing as the center of knowledge production and exploring collaborative methodologies, such as community-engaged research, feminist ethnography, performance studies, and digital storytelling. Her digital storytelling projects include collaborations with Afro-Colombian women activists, LGBTQ members of farm working communities in California's Central Valley, and Latinx immigrants in Baltimore. So welcome to all of our panelists. We're just thrilled to have you. Thank you so much. And just a note that the library does have some resources for grad students, such as making a research appointment. You can see the different options and librarians by subject area, so feel free to make an appointment there. We also have a graduate student guide with a handout, and then we will be sending on workshop recordings from this semester, so feel free to check those out as well. So we will get right to it and start off with some questions for our faculty panelists.
So new doctors in academia might find it difficult getting their work seen by those in their field. Can you provide insight into how one might promote their recent publications?
Should we go in the order of the introductions?
Yes, please.
So I guess Pam is first.
Okay. Social media certainly is playing a role in academia these days, but it's actually not an avenue through which I feel very comfortable promoting my own work. But social media certainly is one avenue for those who are very comfortable with it. In addition to any other advice given by the other panelists, I would say that you would want to focus also on your relationships with others. So getting to know other people who are working in your area, and also senior scholars working in the area through your conference attendance and other sort of networking avenues, as they get to know you, they will get to know your work. And that's what's important, because even if you promote the work, but if people in your field don't know who you are, they may not read the work or retain the information that they've read your work, and when they're writing and sort of citing, thinking about who they're going to cite. So in addition to the electronic avenues through which promotion of work is done, make sure that you also work on making your connections with other people so that they get to know you as a scholar, and through that, your work.
Yeah, I will resonate several of the things that Dr. Bennett has just said. Of course, present your work at a conference. It doesn't have to be only your professional association conference. Sometimes there are local conferences with more thematic focus where you can find scholars that are doing research in your specific field on your topic. Take advantage of social media, and today we have social media that is focused on academia, such as Kudos, ResearchGate, and academia.edu. So you can create profiles on those and share your research. You can try to create a paragraph-long research story that is accessible for a broad readership. You can, after you finish your dissertation, or if you get a work published, you can email that directly to scholars doing similar work. So you can go through your reference list at the end of your paper or dissertation and see who are the key scholars there that you cited. There are references for you. And especially if you cited them in a good light, you can email your work to them so that they will know who you are. And if you are a member of a professional association, sometimes the association as a whole or individual sections of the association will have newsletters with a section in which they feature recent publications by members. So you can submit that information to them as well to be featured there.
Yeah, I totally agree with what both Dr. Bennett and Dr. Filomeno have said. Social media is huge. I haven't done this, but I've seen a lot of people using like their email signature, also like to share like their latest publications. And we all have like some kind of like digital presence, right? Like, so we're not all like on all social media platforms, but like sometimes we have like either like a personal website, or we have like a professional website related like to the institution or institutions that we're part of. So sometimes even grad students are going to have like a profile where they can update with like recent publications. And I totally agree with like sharing with your collaborators or like your colleagues. And yeah, especially like if you're doing like an analysis that involves like very heavily like someone's work, it's always like nice to share it. And I think that people really like to see like how their work is used by other scholars. And yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. This is great. And just a reminder to anyone attending the session, feel free to put any follow-up questions or questions that are just different topics in the chat, because we will have some open Q&A time where we will ask those questions as well. Thank you. So let's go to our next question. Yeah, and maybe this time we'll go the opposite order. Maybe Dr. Lizarazo, Dr. Filomeno, and then Dr. Bennett. What factors come into play when selecting a journal to submit a publication to?
I would say that it starts with the field or the fields that you're part of, but it also relates to the language or languages that you want to publish in, and also whether like you want to publish open access or not. And even like considering all these things, I feel sometimes like you might want to publish like in places where like people you cite have been published before, or in general, like I feel that like we tend to gravitate like to certain journals or like certain presses. And I feel like that the most common sense approach would be like to consider like the kind of things that you're reading and submit to those places first. But also like talk to people and ask for recommendations, because like sometimes like you have like a very specific topic and someone might have like a good idea of like what could be like a good fit, even if you don't know about that specific venue yet.
Yes, the chair of your dissertation committee should know which journals are the best places to land your articles from your dissertation. I agree that thematic fit is one of the key parts of this decision. You should read the aims and scope section of the journal's website, so to make sure that your article really fits the goals of the journal, and skim over the recent tables of content to see if you find articles there, research that is similar to yours. I never paid attention to the impact factor of a journal when selecting a journal for publication. I have paid attention to the thematic fit and to the reputation of the journal. And uh, you should be very careful with predatory publishers. You know, every other day I receive an email from Journal of Social Sciences, the Interdisciplinary Journal of Society and Politics, you know, with some like generic name like that, inviting me to submit an article, promising to, you know, go from submission to publication in 6 weeks. And, you know, you just have to pay a fee of $500 to get it published, you know. So I usually look for it to see if the journal is either housed in one of the major publishing platforms like Taylor and Francis, Elsevier, Sage, or if it's a journal affiliated with a professional society, right? Or even a section of a professional association. So, for instance, the Urban Politics section of the American Political Science Association publishes the Urban Affairs Review. Right? That's the official journal of the section. So that gives credibility to the journal. And as a rule, I would say, at least in my discipline, the flagship journals of the professional associations are the most prestigious.
So I would add, there's very little to add. I think those answers really covered things quite well, but I agree that the flagship journals are the prestigious journals. They have a lot of impact in terms of exposure of your work to others. But of course, it's very difficult to publish in those journals, and wouldn't want to spend a lot of time constantly submitting to the flagship journal. If you have a very special paper, certainly do that. But journals associated with sections, I think, are a good way to target your audience. Sending your paper to that journal where people are reading about the thing that you're writing on. So that's just echoing the advice of looking to see where the papers are published that you cite, and then assess the journal for fit for your particular paper. I always do a search on the journal in terms of whether or not looking specific to see what they've published on the topic I'm writing on, to see if it's just a one-off paper. Maybe I do cite someone who's in that journal, but they've only published 1 or 2 papers on that topic. Maybe that's not the best fit, although it could be, you know, so you might want to just assess the journal in terms of its coverage of the topic. And echoing all of the other advice about, you know, being very careful about predatory journals. There are a lot of outlets these days, and you want to also get advice from your colleagues in your department about where are the outlets that they value, in addition to where the conversation is taking place on the topic that you're writing on.
Thank you so much to our panelists. And I'm actually going to just read a question that came through in the chat. So thank you. Let's see. The question is, when selecting a journal, there seems to be a large expense involved. How do you navigate those expenses? And are those expenses usually taken on by me as the publisher? As a newer academic, are there funding opportunities for me to apply to help with publishing?
So that would be the article processing fee in the case of open access journals, right? I never paid for to have, you know, an article published. Every journal that I have submitted, it's, you know, there's a paywall for the journal, or there has to be a library subscription for people to access that journal, so they don't have to charge for the publication of each single article. So you don't have to do that, only if you really want your article to be open access. And I know there is, like a good reason to do that. If you find a reputable journal that charges a fee for open access publications, and you feel like there is a strong reason for you to choose that journal and the open access option, then if you are in the social sciences at UMBC, you could apply for a small research grant from the Center for Social Science Scholarship to publish that. But you would have to, in the application for that small research grant, which might not even cover the whole fee of the journal, you would have to justify why that particular journal is the best, place for that particular article, right? And that justifies you having to pay that fee and asking money from the university for that.
I was gonna say, like in STEM fields, it's very common that like departments and like advisors will actually like cover like some part of those fees too. So those are definitely like options for you to explore.
Yeah, but I would say that I haven't paid for publishing anywhere, and even like when I have published open access, it's usually like part of like the journal's mission, so the whole journal is open access. So if someone is asking you to pay to publish, like I would ask like for a couple of opinions, like to see if it's worth it and it's actually like a good expense, like to even apply for additional funding.
And that it's possible perhaps that if the research that you're publishing was funded by a grant, that, or as you write grants, perhaps you could put into the grant proposal funding for publishing in open access journals. So if the funding agency highly values disseminating the research through open access journals, then perhaps you could build into the grant application funds to pay those fees for that purpose.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And yeah, keep the questions coming. Anyone who's attending, this is great.
The next question is about conferences. How do you identify relevant conferences to attend and present your research at?
I think I'm starting on this question. I attend the major, the conference that's associated with my discipline's primary association. So that's the national conference. I also participate in conferences that are associated with my sub area. There are also conferences that are sort of tailored around group membership. So for example, the Association of Black Sociologists is one that I might attend. So essentially I focus on the national conference and the conference dedicated to the sub area that I'm working on, because that's where I'm going to find the audience who's really interested in the work that I'm doing and may perhaps, make connections for collaborations in the future. And there can be, for me, there are a number of those area specialty conferences. And so I don't attend them each year because that would be extremely expensive and also would require a lot of time. But I rotate between them on some semi-regular basis, attending the major conference more often, but then rotating among the area conferences a little less frequently.
Yeah, that's basically the advice that I was going to give. And in addition to looking for the conferences of your discipline, there are also some interdisciplinary associations. So in my case, for instance, the Latin American Studies Association, LASA, the Urban Affairs Association, the Latinx Studies Associations. So those are interdisciplinary associations that, are also, they have great conferences. Also be careful that some conferences are also predatory, so make sure that your conference is legit, it's affiliated with an association, and look for both, national and regional associations, right? So in sociology, political science, international studies, there are both nationwide conferences, which are actually sometimes international, attracting people from other countries. And then there are the regional ones, right? That might be specific to the Mid-Atlantic or the East Coast. So those are, important conferences as well.
Yeah, I would add that I really loved attending grad student conferences when I was a grad student, and it was like great practice, and a lot of these things are like local or like part of your institution, so that I feel that that's like a good place to start. And there's like I also really like interdisciplinary conferences, and there's like specific conferences such as like the American Society for Theater Research and Tepoztlan Institute that allow you to present like a work in progress paper. So people are actually reading the paper before you present, and you have like a more interactive, like in-depth conversation about like what you're working on. And there's also like some kind of like summer seminars, sometimes like held like at different institutions or like part of like I don't know, like social sciences or like a humanities grant or fellowship that allows you to also like interact like more with like a smaller group of people, and that's pretty good. Um, I feel like now also with the pandemic, like it's also important to think about like accessibility. So I also think about like COVID safety and like hybrid options and all those things like as reasons like to attend or not a conference. So there's like so many conferences that are available, and I feel that this is like publishing. Like you might want to have a conversation with faculty colleagues and see like what has worked for them, and it depends on like on your goal.
Yeah, and sometimes the more regional or at least more thematically focused conferences or symposium might be they can be better for me, at least in the terms of the feedback that I received, than the larger conferences, because sometimes they are so large, there are so many panels happening at the same time, and the participants are spread thin, that I've presented at conferences in which there are more people in the panel than in the audience, right? So how much feedback are you gonna get? How much dissemination of your research is really happening in that situation? And I'm looking here at some of the follow-up questions. Do conference papers count as publications? If it is published if the conference has, the annals of the conference or the conference proceedings, that is a publication, but it will not be a peer-reviewed publication. So it's not like it's something that would really count for your publication record in a meaningful way. But you should submit a conference paper to a journal right after. That's the idea, right? You go to the conference, you will receive some feedback, you will revise the paper accordingly, and then you submit for publication.
And then like what will be like differences between the revision proceedings of like journals and conference papers?
I'm not sure about that question. I never had to revise a paper for a conference proceeding, so I don't know how. Maybe it's not something specific to my discipline.
I'm not familiar with it either.
My thought was that this is like field specific, because I know that conference papers like in fields like linguistics count as peer review because like the process is different. But again, like this is the type of thing where like just talk to people who are like in the same field or like are doing something similar to what you envision doing, because it varies. And also I feel that like not all conference proceedings are the same. So in some cases, like you're publishing exactly the same thing that you submitted, and in some other cases, like they want like a longer version of that. So it's always good to ask questions about this. And I think in general, like you can always like contact editors, or you can contact organizers too, to get like additional details about these things, because like sometimes like things are like so niche that like that specific conference like might have like a particular way of like seeing these specific publications that are not related like to what like big national organizations are doing.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Lizarazo. We have an additional question in the chat. What strategies do you employ to use conferences to get feedback on your research from the wider academic community? Is that a worthwhile process, and how so?
That's the whole point of going to a conference, right? To get feedback. But like we've discussed, it's not, it really depends on the conference, because if it is a conference that, you know, you're not likely to have a lot of people in the audience, if it's a conference that doesn't require you to submit your full paper in advance for others to read, if it's a conference that has, you know, maybe there is a chair for the section for your panel, but there is not a discussant assigned. So that's a conference that will not be very useful for you in terms of receiving feedback. It might be useful for you in terms of disseminating your research and your name as a scholar for you to be present there. But I would say favor conferences that ask for you to send your paper in advance for the other panel members, and conference that assign a discussant for your panel, or that the chair is also responsible for discussing the papers. And maybe a conference where that is more specific in theme, where you're more likely to get scholars interested in your topic and who are used to do research in that topic. They will be the ones more likely to give you useful feedback.
Yeah, I agree with that. And about like huge national conferences, I think that the best way to do them is organizing a panel. And I remember specifically that Felipe, you organized a panel for the Latin American Studies Association, I think 2018 maybe, and it
2019
included,
Barcelona,
oh
good
yeah,
days.
2019, yeah, and it included like people doing work with Latin American immigrants in Baltimore, and there was a discussion. So these panels tend to have like small audience. We had a small audience, but like a good number. Like no, it was like more people in the audience than in the panel. But because we had a discussion, and because we knew each other, we were able to have like a conversation that we wouldn't be able to have like if you're randomly assigned to a panel with people that you don't know, and then if it's not thematically interesting for a lot of people, then you end up like maybe presenting like to one person. So I think that organizing panels is like a good practice, and sometimes like conferences have like this type of setting where like either grad students are encouraged, or like there's like a specific section for grad students to be doing this kind of work, but also like you can try to do it with like your own colleagues or people that you're working, like you're already collaborating with.
Yes, I would echo the value of having, of participating in conferences that have discussants, because that is a really good way of kicking off the conversation. Not only will you get the feedback from this person who has thought about your work, and sometimes in relation to the work of other people on the panel, but in terms of the Q&A with the audience, sometimes that discussant can also help sort of prime the audience for asking questions of your paper, of you, and engaging with you directly with about your work. And then you can turn those conversations that took place in the Q&A to maybe additional conversations that you can follow up on later for additional feedback, or engaging with that person about, you know, more context around the question that they asked, or even asking if you could send them the full paper and getting their feedback if it's someone whose question or comment seemed very valuable to you, or you would like more feedback from them.
Thank you. This has been a great discussion about conferences. And there is just a placeholder just saying, if you have questions, please feel free to either unmute, you can raise your hand, and you can definitely use the chat and keep using the chat. Thank you to all who have asked questions. So we're gonna head over to a question about peer review and handling feedback. Maybe we can, in this order, Dr. Bennett, and then Dr. Lizarazo, and then Dr. Filomeno. Arbitrary. But the question is, how do you process feedback from peer reviewers? When receiving feedback, do you always have to modify what the readers or the revisions of a publication comment suggested?
Okay, well, I process feedback from peer reviewers. First of all, I read the reviews and then I put them away for a couple of days. Give myself time to digest them and, work through my emotions over them, because I'm sure they would have primed a lot of emotions. And then I come back to them with a cooler head. And I just try to think about, why is the reviewer asking what they're asking? Why are they saying what they're saying about the work? So, of course, when I submitted the manuscript, I thought it was crystal clear what I meant and what I found and all of those good things. But obviously, if someone's asking questions or if they're making a particular comment, try to get beyond, how it might make you feel, but why are they asking for what they're asking? I don't think that you always have to modify the manuscript. However, not doing so is risky. If you can support the reason, if you can support why you're not making a certain change, then you need to do that. You need to be able to support it and perhaps be convincing to not only that particular reviewer, but to the editor as to why you're not making a particular change. But of course, also keep in mind that editors don't want to dismiss the concerns of people they've asked to review the manuscript. So it's a little bit risky to do it. And I personally have had the experience of not making what I thought was an important change around language. The reviewer asked for a particular change around language, and I thought it was not something I wanted to do nor should do. And I feel like it did cost me a publication in a very prestigious journal, and it was because of this conflict. So, just think about how you can satisfy the reviewers without compromising, of course, your values, your ethics around the issue. But assume that they are asking those questions and suggesting revisions for a reason, and try to understand what those are and how you can achieve it. Even if it's not doing the very specific thing they're asking, maybe you can accomplish it in a different way. And then you can explain in your memo back to them how you have attended to this issue in this other manner.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. Especially the read it and put it away. And in the meantime, just process your feelings, because there's a lot of things that come up. Like if you're feeling like self-doubt or imposter syndrome, when you get critique of your work is especially when those things flare up. So it's useful to ask someone else to read them too. So you can have your own version, but also you can talk about this with someone who either has read your paper, or maybe it's your advisor, or knows your work. And one strategy that I've used is using a spreadsheet to kind of summarize the changes and what changes I need to make. But in a way that maybe has a different language. So it's much more neutral. So I usually have more, I see this more as a checklist and less as a critique of the work. And I agree that but maybe you can find a way to present your work with a stronger argument, or maybe decide if that's something that that you're feeling strongly about. And usually that's a good it's a good signal that you're doing the kind of work that you want to do. And I feel that even like if you get a rejection or something like that, it might be easier like to reframe it if you just like basically do all the comments that like someone suggested, and in the process you're betraying like the kind of work that you want to do.
Yeah, I will add that, after you read the reviews, set them aside, and when you pick them up later, come up with a revision strategy, right? So decide what are the most important points that the reviewers make. That will be your priority. Those are the major revisions that you have to introduce. What is more secondary, easy changes or things that you will not, maybe some critiques that you receive sometimes are because people misunderstood what you were trying to say, or are saying that something's missing when it's not, when you actually put it there. Of course, in your response, you will not say, I actually mentioned that, it's on page X. You will say that you changed the language to make that more clear and explicit, or you shifted the position of that in the text to make it more prominent. And in terms of mindset, I try to see the reviewers as my co-authors, because sometimes they really have made my research better, made me think about something in a different way, made me consider something that I had not considered that I should have. So at the end, the paper is much better than in the beginning, and I'm thankful for the reviewers for that, right? And it's very common for reviewers to have very different appraisals of the same paper, and sometimes when as a reviewer, when you receive a paper to review, later you receive, the reviews that the other reviewers also made for the same paper, and you see how different they can be from each other, right? So, don't take, everything, personal. Don't make it personal, but take the time, after your head has cooled down, to come up with a revision strategy, right? What are the steps that you will take? What are the key revisions that you have introduced? What are the minor ones that you can take care of at the end? But and coming up with this revision strategy will help you, create your response to the editor and to the reviewers at the end, in which you will have to say, point by point, what change did you introduce to the paper in response to that, right? So the editor will have to see all those things in detail. So
Thank you very much.
I would actually like to follow up those comments with just one other point. I really love the point about the reviewers being seen as co-authors, because they are making the manuscript better. To add to that, when you write that memo back to the reviewers, you probably want to be generous to the reviewer who's given their time to give you their assessment of the work. Reviewing actually does take quite a bit of time, and it's volunteer, it's service. And so even though something is in the paper, for example, that a reviewer might have said, I don't see this, it's probably because that person was reviewing your manuscript under time pressure or with juggling a lot of other commitments. So just be generous when you respond back to the reviewers, in a way that lets them know just be courteous, even though your emotions have been processed and set aside. Be generous and courteous in your memo back to the reviewers.
Thank you so much. This has been great. It looks like there are a couple related questions in the chat, so I'll just go ahead and share some of those. What is the selection process? Who will serve as peer reviewers is one question. And there's another question about a typical length of time. Is there a typical length of time that it takes to go through the journal publishing process, including the writing, submitting feedback, and edits? How much time should you anticipate setting aside for this process? Yeah, and then
In terms of the selection, how editors select the reviewers, they are editors, right? So they were appointed editors of a journal because they are a well-known person in that field. So they know other people who do research in, the different subfields of the discipline, and they can send it out. They might also look at your reference list, right? To see who are the people that you cite there, to see who are the references in your subfield, and they might send out to those people for review. They might select reviewers from your reference list. They might also select reviewers from the list of authors who have published in their journal about your topic, right? So if you could, you can search, my research, for instance, on immigration. So I can go to the Urban Affairs Review, type immigration, and see who are the authors that have published about immigration in that review. Those authors are likely to be invited to be reviewers of my paper, right? So that's, those are some ways in which reviewers are selected.
There are also members of the editorial board for the journal. So there are people who are there, and serving on the editorial board means that you sometimes are asked to review papers that are not squarely related to what you do. That's a more general review, but so not everyone is going to have precisely the background in what you're in your manuscript topics to review it. But if they're having difficulty, I think especially getting people to agree, which is happening more and more lately, then someone from the editorial board might be asked to review it who has, whose work is adjacent to your work, but who could give a reasonable review of the manuscript. And typically, if you agree to serve on the editorial board, you agree to review a certain number of manuscripts, and so they don't expect you to turn them down when they ask you to do it.
Thank you.
I was going to just comment on the time period. It's really hard to say how long it takes. I think that varies a lot with the outlet. And it's also, the time is dependent upon so much on how quickly those reviewers will get the reviews back. And sometimes a journal, it can take a very long time if a reviewer isn't being quick about it, in the standard time frame of, what is it, about 4 weeks they ask for it, for you to complete a review in about a month's time. And if that person doesn't come through, then maybe it's 6 weeks. But if the person never delivers the review, well, then the editor has to go and find another reviewer. And so that can substantially delay the process.
Yeah, in my experience, like, it wouldn't be rare to spend like a whole year, like in the whole process, especially like since 2020, things are slower. And depending on the place, like when you submit revisions, they might ask the same reviewers or two different reviewers to check the manuscript again. So it also depends on like how fast the editors can even like get to the manuscripts that they're receiving and can send them out. So I think that sometimes like it's good practice to just ask the editors about like the estimated timeline. And I feel that call for papers for a specific like special issue might go faster because like there's like two editors usually that are going to be doing the review and sending them like to additional reviews.
Thank you. And this is continuing the theme of writing for journals. Is there advice for how to condense your work into an article that fits the article's guidelines while also not taking out what are important parts of your research?
Yeah. So you really have to stick to the word limit, right? I think editors hate when you don't respect the word limit. And I'm also someone that I tend to write more than less, So for me, it's always the challenge is not getting to the word limit, is, keeping it down. And generally speaking, try to make the introduction short, try to make the literature review short, and focus on your findings and the discussion of the findings. Also the methodology section, like make it, short. So in terms of the, different sections of the paper, that's what I would advise.
I would say that in humanities paper, you probably want like one specific argument that you are like providing evidence for, like instead of like multiple different arguments. So that is like one way that you might select what's like the evidence or the data that you're going to be using. And yeah, sometimes like if you have like multiple research questions, then I would say like maybe thinking about like one single research question for like one paper might be a way of like making sure that you're making something that is like shorter than like a thesis, for example, because I imagine that you're trying to think about like how to turn like a thesis like into a journal article. So sometimes it can be like you can make a chapter into the journal article, or like you can choose like one of the specific arguments that you're making through your research based on the data that you found.
So this is advice for when you're on the margins, like when you're kind of close to fitting that paper into the word limit that the journal has imposed. Think about the ways in which your writing can be more concise. In social science, there are these standard phrases that we use all the time, and the ways in which, for example, is one of them, and that sort of take 4 or 5 words to say something you could say with one word. So you can examine your writing for those kinds of things to remove them and free up a little bit more space. Now, that's not going to get you, from a very long document into a very short document, but when you're almost there, that's another place to look for where you can trim your writing to fit the word limit.
Thank you so much. I'm realizing we have a few more slides than we have time for, but the theme has kind of been a lot on writing. So I think what we'll do is we will jump to a couple questions about writing. Yeah, can you give some tips on overcoming perfectionism while writing for publication?
This is something that I certainly suffer from, like probably many people. And I'll make my answer very short. You might try writing on an index card a certain number of questions that you will use to confront yourself with. Is it things like, would you rather publish one perfect article than have a body of work that could have an impact on the way people think and see the area that you're working in? So that's really designed to ask you about your deeper values. Is it about a perfect product, and by whose definition? Because it's really the reviewers and the editor that you need to satisfy in addition to your own standards. So think about yourself 3 or 4 years from then, you're going to look back on that paper and you'll see that it's not perfect, that it couldn't have been perfect, because you will have grown as a scholar, and you'll look back on your previous work and find all kinds of things that you didn't realize were there. So just think about what are your deeper values with respect to perfectionism.
Yes, and you will, I don't think I know anyone who has ever received, the paper is just accepted without a request for revisions, right? There is always a request for revisions. So usually what I aim for is that I want to have a paper, a manuscript that is good enough to get a revise and resubmit, And of course, it takes a bit of experience to know what that good enough means. And what has been helpful for me is to have a second look, another pair of eyes on the paper, because it has happened to me before that I have sent, a manuscript to a colleague, and the response was, "Why haven't you sent it out yet?" Because it was already good enough. So maybe have, your advisor or another colleague look at the paper to make sure that it fulfills, like the essentials of a manuscript.
I really like those things. Should have taken notes. Yeah, I suffer from the same, and I feel someone told me that like you shouldn't wait until it's like 100% there, because you are always going to receive uh comments and suggestions. So it's more about like get it like 80% there and then let it go, because like you're going to need to revise it again. And like most of the things that you're obsessed about are not the things that you're going to get revisions on. For me, it's always useful to think about like who am I accountable to? And usually it's not the editors, it's not the reviewers. So this is related like to what Dr. Bennett said about values. So it's like, why are you publishing this? And is it more important to actually publish it than just to let it sit and like continue overthinking about like your own writing or like your own arguments? And most of the times like the answer is like no, like you should actually get this done and maybe continue moving forward like with whatever other projects like you have.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful session. To close, again, if there's last minute questions, we have 3 minutes. We'll just leave this up for a little bit. We wanted to thank all our panelists. We wanted to especially thank Dr. Bennett, Dr. Filomeno, and Dr. Lizarazo for their time, for all their work at UMBC, and for participating in this panel. Just leave this up for a little bit. There's some thanks in the chat. This has been a wonderful panel. We are so grateful we were able to record it, and so we will also send it out to everyone who attended and those who expressed interest in attending.
Just add one thing which was on the list that you sent us of
Yes,
questions.
please do. I know we
think
didn't get
it
time for
was
everything.
an advice that I received later in my career, and I think it was so useful. I used to wait to have, like 3 to 4 hours in my calendar open for me to be able to sit down and write. And I shifted from that to writing 30 minutes, at least 30 minutes every day. And it's usually the first thing that I do work related in the morning. And set your timer on. 30 minutes go by really fast, and the fact that you're writing every single day helps you keep up that momentum, and it's really helpful. So don't wait to have like a huge, like several hours open on your calendar to, assign time for writing. Write every day at least 30 minutes.
And if I may
Thank you.
add one thing, I dropped a link in the chat to a resource titled Scholarly Communication in Sociology. Although it's about sociology publications, I think it's written in a way that would be helpful to those who are in other social science disciplines. So you might want to check that out.
And I love Scrivener, which is a software that allows you to track like number of words, and you can actually see the progress, like if you add like the number of words that is like your target like for the final draft. So I think that like think whatever like helps you. I agree, like sometimes it's a timer, so it's not like a minimum like number of words. But sometimes it's just like, okay, you need to complete like, I don't know, 200 words so you can actually make progress every day for like a bigger project. And whatever works for you, yeah, like everything counts. You just need to have like a terrible first draft, and like most of writing is revisions, and most of the revisions happen like with collaboration. So ask other people like to read your work, present it, like, yeah, that helps.
Absolutely. Well, if we do not have additional questions, I'm gonna stop recording right now, and